This is Talk of the Nation. I'm Lynn, Neary in Washington. The United States is often called a Puritan nation. It's a shorthand way of saying we're a society filled with repressed, austere killjoys. But that's too limiting, says author and humorist Sarah Vowell. In her new book, The Wordy Shipmates, Vowell takes us into the lives of the Puritans. It's a world packed with heresy, exile, quotable sermons, and punctuated with colorful characters. Think John Winthrop and Anne Hutchinson. Okay, so maybe you don't remember who they are, but Vowell will remind you and tell us what makes them so fascinating. If you want to talk with Sarah Vowell, give us a call. Our number here in Washington is 800-989-8255, or send an email to talk@npr.org, and you can comment on our blog. That is at npr.org/Blog of the Nation. Later in the hour, the lowdown on the Dow. What does it mean to you? But first, a witty look back on that city on a hill. Joining us now is Sarah Vowell. Her book is called The Wordy Shipmates. She joins us now from our bureau in New York. Good to have you with us.
Thanks.
Now, I suspect that a lot of listeners who may know you from This American Life would be surprised to discover that you really are quite a historian. Is this a new love of yours?
I don't think of myself as an historian. I just think of myself as a writer. And I still just write about history as a journalist. You know, I set out to just find out about things and then go forward. I'm not any kind of expert. So I think maybe for that reason, my books can be fairly welcoming to people who think they're not interested in history, which is, I call those people Americans.
But you're not a slouch. I have to be honest with you. I learned an awful lot, and some of it I think I never learned. Maybe some of it I had forgotten, but a lot of it I think I didn't know in the first place. And I was really surprised by just how much history there really is in there. There's a lot of really, classic Sarah Vowell moments, and there's a lot of funny stuff in here, but I learned an awful lot about the Puritans, but I bet a lot of people are wondering, okay, the Puritans, Sarah Vowell, why? Why the Puritans?
Well, one reason, I think the reason I wanted to do it is probably the reason you were perhaps less informed on the subject is because, what people think of the Puritans, and I specifically write about the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony around the Boston area in 1630s, is that they're so intellectual, and I think we sort of think of Puritans as stupid, but they're so brainy and they're so learned that a lot of their writings are kind of dense and hard to get to, and so I feel like I tried to do that for you, understand them, and then hand over the juicier, more quotable bits from their writing, but it's their writing and their sort of passion for literature and for books. One book specifically, the Bible, of course, but just the writing is so vivid sometimes, and there's so much of it. They were intensely bookish people, considering their kind of frontiersmen. It's remarkable, and it's the thing I admire most about them. And I started out. I didn't start out in radio. I started out writing as a critic, and I wrote about books and music mostly. And so this is kind of a return to that root. A lot of what I write about is the writing.
Yeah. Which is why they are called wordy shipmates. I have to say, when I first saw that, I thought they were all very talkative people or something.
Well, they are. They cannot shut up, and some of them more than others, and some of them get kicked out of Massachusetts for their talking.
Well, I have to go right to the first point you made, which is that you are talking about the Puritans from the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 1630s. Right from the start, I have to admit that I didn't realize the distinctions there were between the Plymouth Puritans and the Massachusetts Bay Colony Puritans and things like that. Would you really go into?
Yeah, well, I think mainly when we learn about 17th century New England in school, it's basically we hear about Plymouth and Thanksgiving, and then maybe there's a pit stop at the Salem witch trials, and then move on. But in the middle bits are actually, I think, with the Bay Colony and John Winthrop and John Cotton and their shipmates, I think that's sort of the most crucial our most crucial inheritance as Americans sort of comes from their ideas of themselves as chosen by God, the idea of the city on a hill. I think. Not to downplay the importance of Thanksgiving, but I think knowing about Winthrop and his people is we are them in a lot of ways.
Well, let's just talk about that whole idea of a city on a hill, because that was a phrase from one of Winthrop's sermons, which we have heard over and over again in different forms in modern speeches. Tell us a little bit about.
We've heard that one phrase, but it comes at the end of a fairly long sermon,
Mm-hmm.
and to me the sermon it's really quite beautiful, and it's the context of it is we don't know specifically when Winthrop gave it, either back on the shore in England as the colonists were about to set sail, or maybe on out on the open sea. But my point being that sermon was. It was delivered at the very beginning, before the colonists even arrived in New England. And I was just rereading it, a little bit of it again this morning, and thinking about in the context of leadership, and these people were on the verge of a pretty scary future, and they don't know what's coming, and they don't even know if they'll live through the sea voyage. And Winthrop is telling them this is going to be hard, and we are going to have to stick together, and we should be knit together in this work as one man, and rejoice together, and mourn together, and suffer together, and as if we're members of the same body. He's saying we're one person. We should be one person in this endeavor, and that is our work, and we will be the city on a hill, and people are watching us, not just to look up to us, but also perhaps to see us fail. And so it's this very stirring, it's just this very stirring sermon about solidarity and community. That I think when, the phrase is just the city on the hill, the soundbite, when it's just, thrown out there like it was the other night in the vice presidential debate, Sarah Palin threw it out. It's just as shorthand that everyone should look up to us. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't exactly what Winthrop meant entirely. He thought everyone could look up to us, but he also thought we are special, we are blessed, we have this enormous responsibility, and if we fail, everyone will see us fail. And I think sometimes in America we might understand that part of it.
But something that was really interesting about your own, the sort of the personal connections you made with that sermon came at the time of 9/11, and the sense of community that you felt occurred in New York at that time. Sort of that sermon, I guess, kind of resonated in your head at that time.
Yeah, it was just one of the things I read to just as kind of solace, that part, the rejoicing and suffering together as members of the same body. And I would turn to that sermon in those days because, for one thing, living in New York, besides the, actual just grief, the air quality was so poor, and partly that was because of the incinerated steel and building materials from the World Trade Center, but it was also our incinerated fellow citizens. We were breathing them, and that was horrifying. But also on the ground in Manhattan at that time, and it was so beautiful, really, and there was a sense of this kind of communal love, and people look you in the eye on the sidewalk and say hello, and it was not a happy time, but a really meaningful time because of that sense of community in a time of crisis.
So when you read that and you make the connections, do you think there really is like a direct connection in the sort of in who we are as Americans to this group of people who brought over those kinds of notions, with them when they created the colony?
I definitely think there's a direct connection to their idea of themselves as God's new chosen people. I think we're not always good at solidarity in this country, you know. I mean, I came of age in the Reagan era, and I spent a bit of the book talking about the way President Reagan would, bandy about that phrase, and about being a city on a hill. And to me, my interpretation...
And he called it a shining city on the hill.
Yes, he liked to sparkle things up a little bit. He was still a little bit of a showman there. Like, to me, the sermon is it's called a model of Christian charity, and it's about charity and generosity and communal welfare, basically, which, you know, wasn't really President Reagan's strong suit. I mean, he could quote the City on the Hill bit, and then, you know, Winthrop, and then go and cut the budget for housing and urban developments, you know, sending, you know, thousands of people out of their homes and things like that. So part of it, there's like a true Christianity, and I mean the kind of radical revolutionary Sermon on the Mount sort of Christianity. And in fact, Winthrop gets the image of the city on a hill from Jesus, from the book of Matthew. And there's, I don't even know where I'm going with all of this. I'm just saying, I think in this country, yes, there's a definite direct connection from our idea of ourselves as, you know, the most blessed, chosen nation on earth.
The whole idea of American exceptionalism, I think you say, really,
yes,
they brought
exactly.
with them. Yeah,
but the
which
thing
still lives very much today.
Very much, very much. Yes, we are still the greatest, USA. But the thing that the Puritans had, they were like hardcore Calvinists, you know, and they had this sense of wrath and fear of failure and failing their God. And there was a real kind of constant questioning going on, you know, are they failing their God? And they would do things like have a day of fast, like, oh, we're failing our God, we can't eat today. And I think America has sort of lost a little bit of that, the sense of like fear of failure and responsibility. All
right, we're going to continue this discussion with Sarah Vowell, the author of the new book, The Wordy Shipmates. And if you'd like to talk with Sarah Vowell or have any questions for her, give us a call at 800-989-8255. This is Talk of the Nation from NPR News. I'm Lynn Neary. This is Talk of the Nation. I'm Lynn Neary in Washington. They wear little in the way of colorful clothing, but be assured the Puritans were anything but staid. We're talking with Sarah Vowell about her new book on those vibrant ancestors of ours. It's called Wordy Shipmates. And we're taking your calls at 800-989-8255. Our email address is talk@npr.org, and check out our blog at npr.org/blog of the nation. And we're going to take a call now from Paul, and he is calling from Whiteville, North Carolina. Hi, Paul.
Hi. This is a question for Sarah or Lynn. You had mentioned the Puritan experiment as rejoicing and suffering together as members of the same body. I should like to add that perhaps from a Puritan perspective, as long as that body is male and not female. My question has to do with Anne Hutchinson, if you wouldn't mind, Sarah, talking about that a bit. Namely, would you see Anne Hutchinson as the Joan of Arc of early colonial America? And I'll hang up and listen to your response.
Thanks for that, because the book talks quite a bit about Anne Hutchinson, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. The Joan of Arc, I don't know. I mean, I set up the whole Winthrop sermon, City on a Hill thing, and talk about my love for this beautiful idea of being members of the same body. But then I also say, like, those words were spoken before they even got here and Winthrop actually had to govern. And it turned out that there were a lot of, mouthy rabble-rousers who lived amongst these Puritans, and they needed to be sort of clipped from the body like a toenail, and the troublemakers. And Anne Hutchinson was certainly one of those, and she was this woman, I kind of call her the Puritan Oprah, because she's...
That's better than Joan of Arc, I think.
Probably things turn out better. Well, So Anne Hutchinson, she was a minister's daughter, and she was a mother, a very fertile woman, had, I think 15 children, comes over here with her husband, who's very wealthy. They're kind of like the richest people in Boston, basically. And she's also a midwife, and so she meets a lot of women in Boston very quickly because she's, helping them deliver their babies, and she starts having them over to her house to, at first to talk about that